It's time to fire this thing up.
Welcome aboard ShipShape TV Essentials. This is your port of call for the most impactful upgrades, expert advice, and hands-on solutions from seasons past. This episode is proudly brought to you by SureHold, because anything worth doing is worth doing bright. From cleaning to protecting and perfecting, SureHold has everything you need to keep your boat shining. Don't just go boating, go showboating. Now, let's hoist anchor and set a course for another exciting episode of ShipShape TV Essentials.
Countersink some holes, screw it down, and I'm again going to wet this glass out. Dry fit this thing into the boat. Go ahead and put in this last radius. That looks lined up. Good deal. Hi, I'm John Greviskis. It's great to have you working around the boat with us again. What I'm working on is this fiberglass panel that's part of a transom enclosure that I've installed to this 22-foot Mako project boat. Now originally, this boat had a low cutout transom in it, allowing seawater to flow into the boat under certain conditions. And what was happening is the water was filling into the cockpit and throwing off the ballast of the boat. So this enclosure is going to eliminate that problem from ever occurring again. And what I'd like to get into today here at ShipShape TV is I would like to continue this project by adding a transom gate to the boat. Now when everything's said and done, this transom gate is going to be 16 inches wide and about 11 inches deep. Plenty of room for people to board or to bring in a trophy fish. Now we're also going to be fabricating some sort of gunwale cap back here, and we're going to make that out of beautiful teak wood. It's really going to dress this vessel up great. So how about us making a deal? Let's call it a trade-off. Let's get you to spend the next 30 minutes with us. And in exchange, right after I gather up a saber saw for this transom gate cutout, we'll be doing our very best to let you in on a few more ways to make your boat ship-shape.
This is a real working 28-acre boatyard located in Stuart, Florida, on the shores of the Okeechobee Waterway. It's home base for ShipShape TV. This deep stretch of water connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. And now, once again, here's the host of ShipShape TV, John Greviskis.
Well, thanks, Buck. This is a 1980 Mako 228 that we've been in the process of restoring. Now, I bought the hull for next to nothing due to the amount of spider cracking that was taking place on it. Literally, there were tens of thousands of tiny little spider cracks all over the top side of this vessel. So what I had to do is I had to rebuild this boat cosmetically. What we did is we ground out large areas of gel coat and fiberglass in order to get down into some clean, unfractured glass, giving us something to build off of. Then we laid in some 6-ounce fiberglass cloth, and we started the process of refairing the boat using an epoxy micro balloon wipe on the hull. We had to get into some fairing on the boat, and what we did is we took a pneumatic tool called an air file, and we actually started shaping this. Now for the radiuses and these bends, we had to use a combination of sanding sponges and some hand fairing blocks. And then what we've done is we've painted onto the surface a primer to cover the epoxy. Now what happens is if you just leave exposed epoxy out in the sun, the UV rays are going to really start attacking that epoxy. And if you don't cover it with something, it's going to break it down, and that's going to compromise the structural integrity. Well, we still have a long way to go on this boat, but as you can see, it's coming along rather nicely. Now we've also had to add this transom enclosure, and I want to kind of take you through the process of what I've done for that. Now, I had to remove a pair of Evinrude 100 outboard engines from the boat. I've got them up at my shop. In fact, one of the power heads is blown, and we're going to be putting in a new power head on one of those motors. It's really going to be a great show. Well, once we got the engines off and out of the way, I had to clear the back of the transom. I had a speedo tube, I had a transducer that I needed to remove. We also had some aluminum trim that was encasing the low cutout transom. that all needed to be removed, and then we had to take a countersink and we had to countersink every hole that was left over back here on the transom. Now the reason we did that is we had to add a little bit more surface area for some non-shrinking epoxy that I mixed up. I took a 3-inch wide applicator and I pushed the epoxy into the transom. Then we started the process of actually putting on this enclosure. Now this fiberglass panel was the first thing that we had to deal with. We had to cut it to size. Then what we did is we bolted this fiberglass panel and this engine bracket together in order to set it on the lip of the boat inside where the low cutout was. Now that was so we could take a pencil and we could actually mark for our through bolts and drill those holes out. I used a lot of polyurethane sealant in this installation. I probably went through 3-4 tubes, and we smeared this inside panel along with this side over here, and we literally squished this enclosure onto the boat, and then we bolted everything into place. And that pretty much brings us up to where we are here today. Well, we want to continue the project by adding a transom gate, and we also want to put in some sort of a gunnel cap. And we're going to start off by installing this transom gate. Now you'll notice that I've got a line drawn all the way around here on the transom. This is where the gate is going to be. And again, I was telling you my finish dimension is going to be 16 inches wide. Well, you can see for yourself that it's a little wider than that. This is 17.5 inches wide. And the reason we did that is we're going to be putting in a beautiful teak transom gate casing that's going to go all the way around here, and then we're going to put a rabbet joint in there, and we're going to put a Lexan door, and it's going to hinge out. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's start off by making the casing. Now, I don't want to just use this line. I don't want to cut this fiberglass freehand. I want to use some sort of a template or some sort of a pattern. I only have one shot at doing this right. And if I screw it up, I'm going to spend a week doing fiberglass repair to get back to square one. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take my tape measure and my saber saw, and I want to measure the distance between the outside of the blade and the fence. Now in this case, we're looking at 1 inch and 5/16. Now what I want to do is I want to transfer that line onto a piece of plywood and cut it to size. The line that I'll lay out will be 1 inch and 5/16 smaller than the line that's on the transom panel. Well, now what I want to do is I want to temporarily clamp this thing onto the boat in order to drill a couple of holes in this thing, and we're going to hold it on using some screws, and then I can make my cut. Get this thing lined up. Now everything should be secured. I'll take these clamps off, and I can switch out the blades that are on my saber saw. I have to use a different type of blade than this one that's made for wood. I need to use either a carbide blade or a diamond dusted type of blade like this in order to cut the fiberglass. What'll happen is if you use a regular wood cutting blade like this, is it's going to dull on you very, very quickly. Now I'm going to tape off this plate with some masking tape. I don't want this metal to mar my fiberglass surface. Well, good deal. Now you'll see that we have a balsa core in this fiberglass panel. We're going to need to seal this with some type of laminating epoxy. What happens is if water gets into that balsa core, it could rot and that could start a delamination problem. So we want to avoid that. I'm going to clean up this little edge, and then I'm going to paint this with a 5:1 laminating resin. Now the reason I'm using a slower cure 5:1 laminating epoxy resin is because I want it to soak down into the balsa core. What happens is if you use like a 5-minute epoxy here, it doesn't have a chance to get down into the grain of the balsa core and it just lays on the surface. By being able to absorb into the surface, it gives you a little deeper layer of protection. I'm going to take a little bit of acetone and I'll wipe up my drips, and then I can start cleaning up my tools.
As John cleans the epoxy resin off some of his tools, let's see what the G-Man himself looks for when buying a quality used boat.
I've heard through the grapevine that some of the fiberglass manufacturers of boats have been reducing the weight cloth in key areas on the vessel or eliminating structural cloth altogether. Rather, they're using just fiberglass chop strand mat. What's going to happen is down the road you're going to see some horrendous spider cracking on some very key areas of the boat. And I'm talking like on the gunnel, for instance. If there isn't a presence of a structural glass there, the boat is not going to be able to flex, and that chop just can't handle the flex that it needs to do. So here's my suggestion to the boat manufacturers. Come on guys, let's beef these things back up. You don't want boat owners out there bad-mouthing you for saving a couple of dollars either through materials or through a little bit of time that you're going to save in production. We need to make sure that these key areas are going to flex for those guys out there. And here's my suggestion to the boat owner. When you're at your next boat show and you're looking for that next vessel, ask the manufacturer directly, point blank, hey, what's the laminating schedule in this thing? Everywhere. How long has it been done that way? Is it proven? If we do experience spider cracking, is it going to be covered in my warranty, or is it going to be considered a cosmetic problem? If you're not getting the answers that you deserve, you go out and you look for another boat.
Hey John, great tip. That'll help a lot of people. But unfortunately, the project is not complete, so let's get back into it.
Now that our cutout is sealed with the epoxy, we're going to start the process of making the casing that's going to surround that cutout. And we're going to be using this very expensive piece of teak wood for that. It's 2-inch thick, and I don't have enough material to make one continuous U-shaped piece. So we're going to have to make a couple of L's and butt wood up together. And how we're going to do that is we're going to try to match some grain. What I've done is I've laid out an 1.25 inch wide piece of wood that's 11.5 inches tall. It's also 9.5 inches deep. And take a look at the grain right here. This is going to be this is where it's going to butt up to this piece right here. And I've tried to match our grain pattern. And aesthetically, I think once the two are together, you're never going to be able to tell the difference. But I do need to switch out my blade again on my saber saw. This time I'm going to put in a wood blade, and we'll cut this to size. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have this casing fit over top of this fiberglass panel. It's 5/8 inch wide, something like that. I'm going to be cutting a dado into this thing using my router. Need to head up into the shop to do that. Now I've got my router table set up here along with a fence, and my router blade is only 1/2 inch wide. We need to make a dado 5/8 of an inch wide, so we're going to have to do some multiple passes. Also take a look at the height of the router blade. It's only going up off of this surface about 1/4 inch. Now we're eventually going to have to make a 3/4 inch dado into this stock, And rather than setting this all the way up at 3/4 of an inch, what could happen is when I'm feeding that wood through, I could chip the wood. And again, it's very expensive stock. Let me show you this grain that I'm talking about. I have to true everything up here, but this is really, really going to be pretty. Now what we need to do is we need to take it down to the boat and dry fit it into place. Well, let's see how we did. Get this into place. Here's my other side. That is going to look very, very sharp. Well, what I need to get into is I need to make some sort of a rabbet cut all the way around this casing. This is not only going to be my casing, but it's also going to be a door jamb. We're eventually going to be putting a Lexan smoke glass door in this thing. And I need to cut a couple of tenons here because we're going to be tying into a piece of trim teak here, as well as on this side. I'll head back into the shop. We'll get that done. This is a jig that I've just built out of some scrap pieces of wood in order to hold our horseshoe into place. And what I need to do is I need to true it up. I don't want the rabbet bit jumping right here. You can see that my wood's just a little bit off. That's one of the nice things about working with teak is you can get everything to flow together with just a little bit of sanding. What I've done is I've gone ahead and I've marked out for my tenons right here. What's going to happen is we're going to have a piece of trim coming over top, and I'd like this tenon to go up into that trim rather than cutting a 45. It's going to give me a nicer joint. So I have to set up my table saw for the proper dimension. Now all I need to do is cut my Lexan to size using a bandsaw. It's going to be 1/8 of an inch smaller than the door jamb. When cutting Lexan, you want to use a long blade like the one a bandsaw offers rather than a short blade going up and down. That creates too much heat and it could damage the edge of the Lexan. For the edges, you're going to need to scrape them with some sort of a razor. You want to use a long one rather than just a regular sized razor blade. Use the one from like a utility knife. Then you want to start the progression of sanding it in order to make it clear again. You want to start off with 80 grit paper and then progress all the way to at least 220 grit. This will give you a nice, clear, transparent edge. Well, I again put our casing into our jig so that we can put some hinges onto our Lexan and get our door to open up. And I've got some hinges over here. There are different companies that put out hinges. There are different types of metals that they use for hinges. There's stainless steel, there's chrome brass, there's also different styles of hinges. We need to factor all of this stuff into our selection. And I've got a couple of different types of hinges that just aren't going to work. You want to make sure that your pivot point is going right down the line in between your casing and your door. Now if we hold that pivot point, our hinge is clearly going over the outside of this casing, so this hinge isn't going to work. Now this hinge would work on the inside, and let me tell you what I'm talking about there. Let me show you what I'm talking about. We have a lip right here. We need to through bolt this hinge onto the Lexan. And we're going to have the room on the inside, but again, we have too much room on the outside. Now what I've come up with are these offset hinges, and I've had to notch out the Lexan in order to accommodate them. I'll put them in there. And this is kind of what the door is going to look like. Now I'm going to be using this weatherproofing material in between the hinge and the Lexan. You don't want to just be cranking down on a through bolt into that Lexan. It has a tendency to possibly split on you. This is expensive material. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add this gasket. When everything's done, we're going to add this weather stripping right here on the inside lip of this Lexan. And that's going to help us when we're backing down on a fish. If any water breaks over that bracket, that engine bracket, it's not going to get into the boat. What I had to do is I had to fabricate this cap molding. And basically, what it is it's again out of that 2-inch stock. I had to take a digital bevel gauge in order to get our transom angle. We're looking at 14.8 degrees here. And then I ripped off that same degree off of the stock, and then I set my blade on my table saw to rip this board 2 inches wide, and I started the process of datoing it out using the table saw. I set it up to 3/4 of an inch, and I did some multiple cuts. And this is the result here. We now have a really nice piece of trim molding that matches the width of our transom door casing right here. Now I also had to fabricate a couple of teak braces. We've got one over here on this side of the boat. We also have one over here on this side of the boat, and I had to mount it into the boat. What I did is I pilot drilled in there, and then I went ahead and I drove a couple of screws. And I've gone ahead and I've just kind of pre-cut out the shape of what our transom cap is going to look like. This again is teak. We're going to have a couple of handles in this, one on this side, one over here on this side. And basically all I need to do is take a 1.25 inch hole saw and bore 2 holes, one on each side, and then I'll take my saber saw and I'll cut out the opening. Then I'll go ahead and I'll round everything over, and I'm going to hinge this thing using a piano hinge. And this is the result. We now have a pretty decent looking transom gate and transom cap that hinges up. Well, we've got some more work to do. This is a work in progress. We have to put on this barrel bolt right here, which is going to help keep this door closed. And we need to just shore everything up and put everything in. Now we're not going to be gluing and screwing any of this wood into the boat yet. We have to do some work still to this fiberglass panel back here and to this engine bracket. What we're going to do is we're going to sand this stuff down and we're going to get ready to paint it. We're either going to go with an Imron or we're going to go with some type of all grip or something like that. Then what we're going to do is on the inside of this boat, we're going to make this enclosure very functional. We're going to put in a couple of tackle drawers, a couple of stations back here. It's going to be real nice for fishing. But as you can see, it's coming along really nice. Well, hey, we've got a couple of people that we need to thank. Naturally, we need to thank the gang out here at American Custom Yachts. We need to thank our friends over at Easy Loader Trailers. And we need to thank Clean Seal Incorporated for their help today. But if I'm going to get some supper tonight, I've got a few tools that I need to clean up. So I'm going to get busy at that. I think that's enough work for one day. I love that aspect of boat improvement. Good stuff today. Well, hey, you know the drill. This is the point of the show where we try to answer some of your letters. But before we get into today's question, we need to give everybody at home our addresses. Buck, can you go ahead and do that?
Our mailing address is ShipShape TV, P.O. Box 31561, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida 33420. Or if you have internet access, the address is shipshapetv.com.
Okay, here's today's question. It comes from Gil Siegler, who lives up in the Chesapeake Bay area, and he writes, I have a fiberglass inboard that, like most inboards, has a normal leak around the shaft coupling. Naturally, I always have a small amount of water in my bilge, even with the automatic bilge pumps, perhaps 1 to 5 gallons. The result is I have a lot of moisture / condensation on my engine and engine parts in the enclosed engine compartment. I'm in a saltwater environment that causes a lot of rust on the metal parts. Is there anything I can do to 1, reduce the leakage, and 2, clean the rust off and protect it? Well, yes, there is, Gil. What you need to do first to reduce that water problem is you need to repack the stuffing box. Come on over to the workbench and I'll show you how to do that. Here's a stuffing box set up for you, Gil. And basically what you need to do is you need to loosen up these nuts that are on these studs, and we want to pull that stuffing box apart, and we need to put in a new type of packing. Now this packing right here, this is an impregnated flax packing. There's also a Teflon flax waxing out there. And what you have to do is you have to cut it to size. How you do that is you take it around the shaft, just like this, and you cut it using a box knife at a 45-degree angle. Now you may need several layers of this packing, and what you want to do is you want to wrap the first one right around here. Now here, for example, if this is your first layer of packing right here, and here's your joint, you want to make sure that that second layer is like this, so your joints are offsetting. This is going to help keep some of the water out. Third one would go down here. And when you're putting this back together, you need to evenly bring it into the stuffing box. Do a turn, do a turn, do a turn, do a turn. And you want to just wait until the leaking stops on its own with the shaft not spinning. You do want a little bit of water coming around that shaft when it is spinning. That's going to help cool it off. That's absolutely normal. But with normal wear, you're going to see that your packing is going to allow a little bit more water in over time. So what you want to do is, again, just compress that stuffing box, and that's all there is to it. Gil, good question. Thanks for writing in. We are just about all out of time. I don't know where it goes, but you can do yourself one last favor. Until we see each other again, please get out there and keep your boat ship shape.